With the advent of capitalist imperialism globally between 1890 and 1900, the entire world found itself carved up and divided into two main groups: the imperialist countries on one hand and the imperialized countries on the other. Or, if you prefer, the oppressor nation-states and the oppressed nation-states. Now, the economic and political development of the imperialist countries has been detailed precisely in Lenin's Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, and summarized in the previous Socialism 101 video, What is Capitalist Imperialism? However, the economic system of the far more numerous oppressed countries all around the world requires much deeper explanation. The name given to the system in such oppressed countries is what's known as Bureaucrat Capitalism, or sometimes Bureaucratic Comprador Capitalism. Today we're going to take a look at what exactly this means, what it entails, and most importantly, how this analysis translates into developing revolutionary programs that correctly address the most pressing issues facing the people in bureaucrat capitalist societies. Don't worry, it may sound scary and complicated, but we're going to break it down into the simplest possible terms today to give you a firm grounding in this economic system. This introduction will provide you with a solid foundation for deeper study that you can then pursue using the further reading and resources lists linked in the description box below. But before getting started, this Socialism 101 video has been made possible by leftwingbooks.net, a radical left-wing distributor based in Montreal where you can find Chryslebedev's publications, as well as numerous other anti-capitalist, anti-colonialist, feminist and other left-wing texts. Chryslebedev are publishing two new exciting books shortly, the first of which is called The Shape of Things to Come, Selected Writings and Interviews by the one and only Jay Sakai. Probably should have put a trigger warning for the Yankee chauvinists before saying that name. This is a collection of essays written by Sakai over a 40-year period, including a compelling new 100-page interview about the current political juncture we find ourselves at today internationally. While I personally would have some differences with regard to the specific form of class analysis utilised by Sakai, his work is always engaging and insightful in one way or another. So this is certain to be essential reading for everyone interested in the multifaceted politics of liberation today. The second new Chryslebedev publication is called A Brilliant Red Thread, Revolutionary Writings from Don Hammerkist, edited by Louis Brennan. This is a collection of Hammerkist's texts focusing on organisational theory and strategy for the here and now to bring about the overthrow of the capitalist system with a politically conscious revolutionary mass base. It also includes important passages on anti-fascist activism, as well as how to overcome the challenges presented by modern forms of state repression. Leftwingbooks.net is currently offering a 10% discount to viewers of this channel on all texts using the coupon code EXTRA10. Get over there ASAP as this offer expires on the 23rd of March. Free shipping is available on all North American orders over $50, and inexpensive shipping is also available on all Chryslebedev publications in Europe. A massive thanks to leftwingbooks.net for sponsoring this video and making its production possible, as well as for helping to spread the revolutionary political message throughout all of their hard work. And now, back to the video. Now, let's do a quick refresher on imperialism before we proceed. In the age of capitalist imperialism, no corner of the earth remains untouched by the tentacles of international capitalism. This has erroneously led some Marxists to believe that all countries in the world today are themselves imperialist countries. However, this is deeply incorrect. Some nation-states are imperialists, but most nation-states in the world today are primarily imperialized. To briefly recap the development of capitalist imperialism in the imperialist countries such as France and England, there was a natural, independent progression from feudalism to mercantile capitalism to industrial capitalism. With industrial capitalism's concentration and centralization of capital, free competition was eliminated and capitalist monopolies came to play the decisive role in economic life. This monopolized industrial capital merged with banking capital, creating finance capital and a corresponding financial oligarchy which dominated all aspects of society. From this development of finance capital within the nation-state, the enormous surplus of capital could then be exported to every corner of the world in pursuit of even greater profits that would in turn be sent back to the imperialist core. In order to manage this on a global scale, international monopolist capitalist associations, such as groupings like today's World Trade Organization, were established to divide up and manage the spheres of influence of the major capitalist imperialist powers, thus leading to the complete territorial division of the world among these imperialist powers. This territorial division used to usually take place through open colonialism, but today now mainly occurs through semi-colonialism and neo-colonialism, which offer nominal political independence to the oppressed nations, while at the same time maintaining the very same kind of economic exploitation of these countries by the imperialists. Now, if that all felt a bit overwhelming and you'd like a deeper explanation, have a look again at the previous Socialism 101 video on capitalist imperialism and its corresponding further reading list. In any case, don't be too intimidated, as the rest of this video will be a bit simpler. Just keep in mind that imperialism is international capitalism that spreads out across the world from these imperialist core countries or nation states, which have developed from earlier stages of class society to this highest stage of capitalism themselves independently. Examples of these independent imperialist powers today would include England, France, the USA, Germany, etc. All of those countries that you've heard categorized as the first world or the developed world and so on. Okay? Grand. But what about the oppressed countries in which there was no independent native progression from feudalism to industrial capitalism to the current global capitalist imperialist order? Now this is where bureaucrat capitalism comes in. So what is bureaucrat capitalism? In the simplest terms possible, bureaucrat capitalism is the path that international capitalist imperialism takes in the oppressed countries. Rather than the oppressed countries developing their own native capitalism from feudalism or other earlier economic systems, capitalism is instead foisted upon these countries from abroad. These oppressed countries therefore don't develop their own independent industrial capitalism to benefit their own nation states and keep the wealth generated within the national boundaries, but are instead industrialized by foreign imperialist powers who consequently send the profits generated through this industry back to the imperial metropoles, siphoning wealth out of these oppressed countries and back into the imperialist core. Thus, we see in the oppressed countries not the development of an independent capitalism, but a deeply dependent capitalism which serves not the interests of the oppressed nation itself, but instead the interests of the foreign imperialist powers from abroad. This bureaucrat capitalist process, foisted upon the oppressed nation-states, generally unfolds in two stages. At the first stage, international capitalists privately invest via foreign direct investments into economically backward countries, which themselves are usually based on native feudal or semi-feudal relations of production. In exchange for some breadcrumbs from the table of international imperialism, a native class of middlemen or compradors from the oppressed nation is hired by the imperialists to facilitate this foreign capitalist investment and exploitation of their country. This creates a native private comprador class, which becomes the local appendage of the international capitalist enterprise, managing the international enterprise's affairs at the national level. With the imperialists' vastly greater access to wealth and resources from around the world, the international enterprise is easily able to undercut and corner the local market. driving out smaller local enterprises, concentrating capital into fewer and fewer hands, and creating centralized monopolies. Thus, a form of comprador-led private monopoly capitalism emerges in the oppressed country. Now, moving into the second stage, with the power of these comprador-led private monopoly capitalist relations of production at the economic base, a corresponding societal superstructure is now generated in which the state itself, based on the dominance of compradors who are subordinate to imperialism, comes to serve foreign imperialist interests first and foremost, rather than a native industrial capitalism, which is, in general, strangled out of the market by the imperialists. What you end up with is a state that functions almost entirely as a servant for imperialism to the detriment of the overwhelming majority of the oppressed masses within the country. Compradors not included, of course. Oppressing the proletariat, oppressing the petty bourgeoisie, constraining the national bourgeoisie, and deeply oppressing the peasantry where they still exist. The comprador-led private monopoly capitalists become more and more intertwined with the state itself, with the state now serving the compradors and the imperialists they represent, opening up the country to be sold off wholesale for imperialists to loot and plunder all of the country's natural resources. It thus progresses beyond a private monopoly capitalism and becomes a bureaucratic comprador state monopoly capitalism. The private capitalists and the state capitalists becoming completely intertwined, often slipping seamlessly between high-ranking positions within comprador private industry and high-ranking governmental or other state roles, and vice versa. Meanwhile, the old native feudal landlords retain their positions within the ruling classes and are progressively more and more assimilated to the new capitalist system by the bureaucratic comprador state protecting feudal property relations and peacefully purchasing feudal land from the lords, gradually transforming feudal land relations into capitalist land relations and securing the feudal lords' positions within the newer capitalist system's ruling classes. And this leads us to the fundamental question about the class character of these kinds of societies. It's crucial that we ask, who's in charge in bureaucrat capitalist countries? To put it simply, bureaucrat capitalism at the national level relies on a class alliance between the heavily intertwined private compradors and the state capitalists, as well as the class of feudal landlords where feudal relations of production persist. At the top of this alliance are the class of compradors, then state capitalists, and beneath the capitalists are the peacefully dying class of feudal lords that are progressively being assimilated to the capitalist ruling classes. Importantly, the capitalists are the principal force here, rather than the feudalists. Hence the name of this system being Bureaucrat Capitalism rather than Bureaucrat Feudalism. However, while this is the ruling class alliance at the national level, it's crucial to understand that this national ruling class alliance is ultimately subordinate to the international capitalist imperialist class. In this sense, the ultimate ruling class of the oppressed nation-state under the bureaucrat capitalist system is the ruling class of the imperialist oppressor nation-state. Hence the old saying in oppressed nations that national struggle is class struggle, as the oppressed are directly confronting the imperialist ruling class of the oppressor nation-state. So, to reiterate, the class character of bureaucrat capitalism is the alliance of private comprador monopoly capitalists, state monopoly capitalists, and often feudal landlords, all of whom are subordinate to the international imperialist ruling class or ruling classes. Now, many people will reduce bureaucrat capitalism to simply being the system that exists in semi-colonial and semi-feudal countries. This explanation can be useful to an extent, but there's often a lot of confusion that goes along with these terms and what they mean precisely. And further, they can sometimes be used in an unhelpful box-ticking manner. It's consequently fairly common to hear people say things along the lines of, "This country doesn't have peasants, therefore it's not semi-feudal, therefore it's not bureaucrat capitalism, and therefore this must be an imperialist country," which is a dogmatic misunderstanding of the essence of bureaucrat capitalism. Bureaucrat capitalism is simply the economic system that exists in countries that are dependent primarily upon foreign capitalist imperialism, rather than their own native capitalism. In any case, it's worth taking a moment to examine these terms and what they mean so that the overall essence of bureaucrat capitalism can be better understood. Now, firstly, bureaucrat capitalism can exist in societies that are either openly colonized or hiddenly semi-colonized. This colonial or semi-colonial base of economic dependency is a prerequisite for bureaucrat capitalism. Semi-feudalism, on the other hand, is not a necessary requirement for bureaucrat capitalism, though you will generally find it, or at least very strong remnants of it in bureaucrat capitalist societies. So let's quickly define these terms so that we're all on the same page before proceeding into what this all means for revolutionary strategy. Old-style colonialism refers to territories being under open control, domination, and exploitation by one particular colonial power. Semi-colonialism refers to territories being hiddenly under the economic control of one or more colonial power, achieving the same ultimate economic goals as old-style colonialism through various hidden means. Semi-colonialism refers primarily to the subjugation of the oppressed country at the level of the economic base, the relations of production wherein compradors are facilitating imperialist exploitation of the various oppressed classes and strata within the country. Corresponding to this semi-colonial economic base is a neo-colonial societal superstructure, wherein all of the ideological and repressive state apparatuses are penetrated by the imperialist power, or powers, such as foreign imperialist agents working in oppressed nation governments, or within police or military forces, as well as soft power phenomena like cultural imperialism. In other words, the form of these countries today is that of neo-colonialism, while their underlying essence or content is that of semi-colonialism. Now, as for semi-feudalism, this in essence simply means that feudal landlords still constitute part of the ruling class alliance, either to a greater or a lesser degree. In countries where semi-feudalism is stronger, you'll see open feudal relations of production, typically dominating in the countryside. This generally manifests in forcing peasants to pay feudal rent in kind or feudal money rent for the land on which they live and labour. In certain extreme cases, there may also be outright medieval-style feudal serfdom, wherein serfs are bonded to the land and live in slave-like conditions under feudal labour rent, and wherein these serfs essentially belong to the feudal landlords. But the most common form of feudal peasant exploitation today comes simply in the form of feudal money rent. As bureaucrat capitalism deepens, the feudal landlord class becomes more and more part of the capitalist classes, moving away from direct peasant exploitation and instead towards the employment of wage labour, paying hourly, weekly or monthly wages to agricultural proletarians, and instead relying on standard capitalist rents. At a heavily deepened stage of bureaucrat capitalism's development, semi-feudalism will no longer even appear to exist, as the peasantry will have been largely proletarianized or converted into petty bourgeois small farmers. But upon closer examination, strong remnants of feudalism, feudal property rights, and indeed a persisting feudal landlord class will generally reveal themselves in one form or another. Now, semi-feudal relations at the economic base will of course also produce semi-feudal elements in the societal superstructure, For example, superstitious ideology is common in semi-feudal contexts, with religion often being used to protect feudal property and power relations. Think of absolute monarchies historically, wherein the monarch was the highest level feudal landlord, and their position of absolute power within this feudal system was predicated on the so-called divine right of kings. It was necessary for the masses to believe in this divine right, handed down from God, in order for the monarch to hold on to their power. So, religion played a key role in these societies. Now, regarding revolutionary strategy, bureaucrat capitalism indicates an incomplete bourgeois democratic revolution, unsuccessfully breaking fully from feudalism. A native national bourgeoisie did not successfully rise to the dominant position in the society's ruling class, and consequently, native industrial capitalism has been constrained and prevented from developing. Instead, old feudal land relations persist, and pseudo-industrialization has been imported from abroad by foreign imperialist powers. The exploitative extractive activities of these foreign imperialist powers, which siphon the surplus out of the country and further concentrates wealth into the imperialist core, are facilitated by a class of native compradors who prevent the oppressed nation's productive forces from developing and impede the progressive transformation of the relations of production. Now, this presents significant immediate problems for the project of building socialism, especially in today's world. When all the wealth and resources have been siphoned out of your country and your economy is entirely dependent on foreign imperialist enterprises locked into complex networks of international supply chains, what is there for the national proletariat to seize and redistribute? What precisely can be nationalised, collectivised, and brought under cooperative ownership, ushering in the beginning of the socialist transition? In the absence of a strong national bourgeoisie, when revolution occurs, the foreign capitalist enterprises on which the economy is mostly dependent will simply up and leave the country to find a more capitalist-friendly environment elsewhere to do business in, leaving the country's economy in ruins. And that's before the inevitable sanctions and embargoes begin from imperialist powers like the US and the EU, further impeding potential economic development. So what's the solution to this messy situation? Simply put, national democratic revolution. The national bourgeois democratic revolution must be brought to completion so as to successfully open up the path for socialist revolution. However, this is the bourgeois democratic revolution of the new type, which brings together all historically progressive classes, namely the proletariat, peasantry, petty bourgeoisie, and in certain cases the national bourgeoisie, in alliance under the leadership of the proletariat and its revolutionary vanguard. Where there remains a feudal ruling class, the new democratic revolution must first and foremost necessarily abolish the feudal relations of production and break from dependence upon foreign imperialist capitalism, destroying semi-feudalism and semi-colonialism. This revolution unites all classes that oppose feudalism and imperialism under the leadership of the proletariat. In cases where there no longer remains a feudal ruling class, a proletarian-led national democratic revolution is necessary, beginning after the successful seizure of power, with a period akin to the Bolshevik Revolution's NEP to rapidly develop the productive forces and grow into a self-sufficient proletarian state that no longer relies upon foreign imperialism, thus abolishing semi-colonialism. This revolution brings together all classes and strata that oppose imperialism under proletarian leadership. After semi-feudalism and semi-colonialism are defeated, with the abolition of feudal relations and rapid development of native productive forces, the revolution continues uninterruptedly forward into the socialist transitional stage, wherein the relations of production are progressively transformed from capitalist relations of production into socialist relations of production. All reactionary remnants of class society that persist in the superstructure are then combated through ongoing proletarian cultural revolutions. carrying the movement forward to stateless, classless society. Today we've returned once more to the international system of capitalist imperialism and how it divides the world into imperialist countries and oppressed countries. This time, we looked specifically at the economic system in the latter countries, which is known as Bureaucrat Capitalism, or Bureaucratic Comprador Capitalism. Bureaucrat capitalism is the course that imperialism takes as it spreads its tentacles into the oppressed countries. It generally follows two stages. At the first stage, foreign capitalists privately invest directly into economically backwards countries, being facilitated by a native comprador class that becomes the local appendage for the foreign imperialist power. This develops into a comprador-led private monopoly capitalism. At the second stage, this private monopoly capitalism becomes intertwined with the state, creating a bureaucratic comprador state monopoly capitalism that generally exists peacefully alongside the earlier feudal system, each faction of the national ruling class alliance existing symbiotically and helping one another. Speaking of which, the national ruling class alliance of bureaucrat capitalist society is as follows, in order of power from strongest to weakest. First, comprador private monopoly capitalists. Second, state monopoly capitalists. And third, feudal landlords. All of whom are heavily intertwined, and in many cases, individuals may even take part in all three of these ruling class relations simultaneously. However, it must always be remembered that while this is the ruling class alliance at the national level, the real ruling class of bureaucrat capitalism, to which each of these factions is subordinate and indeed dependent upon, is the international imperialist bourgeoisie. Be that of one specific country, or imperialist bourgeoisies from multiple different oppressor countries. Next, we briefly brushed up on the meanings of colonialism, semi-colonialism, neo-colonialism, and semi-feudalism, before finally proceeding into looking at revolutionary strategy for overcoming bureaucrat capitalism through proletarian-led national democratic revolutions, defeating semi-feudalism and semi-colonialism, rapidly developing the productive forces and transforming the relations of production, and carrying forward the movement with ongoing cultural revolutions, wherein all reactionary superstructural remnants of class society are defeated, paving the way forward to higher stage socialist society. Now, there was a lot to unpack there in this video, and like with everything else, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You need to keep reading and studying to deepen your understanding, ideally with your reading groups and your organisations. I'd recommend that the next stage for developing your understanding of bureaucrat capitalism would be to study what this actually looks like in real-world contexts, which there unfortunately wasn't time for in this brief introductory video. Specifically, I strongly recommend studying bureaucrat capitalism in the Philippines, as explained quite recently by the late Ka Joma, or Professor Jose Maria Sison in 2020's Semi-Feudalism in the Philippines. This is incredibly important as the Philippines' National Democratic Revolution is perhaps the most materially advanced communist-led revolution in the world today. And so from this extremely advanced level of revolutionary practice, they're in one of the best positions to develop and produce the highest level theory. For a slightly less modern, though perhaps more theoretically comprehensive analysis of bureaucrat capitalism, it's essential to study the Peruvian revolutionaries. While it was Mao Zedong who initially coined the term bureaucrat capitalism, it was arguably Abimel Guzman who developed the analysis of bureaucrat capitalism to its highest and most fully fleshed out form, particularly evident in 1974's On the National Question, an analysis which remains relevant and accurate today. Lastly, it's also incredibly important that you study the Indian Revolution, as it too is one of the most advanced revolutions in the world today. You can read about their analyses of bureaucrat capitalism, semi-feudalism and semi-colonialism in India today in their pamphlet Strategy and Tactics of the Indian Revolution. However, bit of a heads up, The numerical system in India is quite different, so make sure to pay attention to the page numbers at the bottom of each and every page. You'll have to jump around the PDF a bit to find the next page that you're looking for chronologically. It's a bit of hassle, but it's well worth the effort. Each of these texts are linked in the description box below, as well as further foundational and more advanced texts diving into bureaucrat capitalism. So, enjoy. Right, thanks very much for watching this video, and thanks especially to the incredibly patient supporters on Patreon who continue to make each of these videos possible with their generous donations. Thank you Blue Collar Red, Jorio4, Andrew Smith, Julia Affentranger, BJB7, Gato Ansok, Comrade Stew, Pretentious Joke Name, Matthew Foy, Jolie, Ugopnik, Grimwater, Ryan Hodgson, Soup, Christian Nepales, Alfonso Dingo Torres, Rotgardist, Zakassi, Anglo-Irish Bolshevik, Thomas Rawson Wood, Bobby Block, Jason Schmidt, Sirshini Violin, Roja, MLM in Practice, Eric Lindahl, Robert Jarzak, Anastasia, Wonderbad, JT Chapman, Joseph Shepard, Comrade Amara, Wealth for the 99%, Peter Kraus, Hagen Mitchells, Carlos De Luna, John Purser, Rodrigo Pichardo, Chairman Bruh, Vacha Fuka, Brian Lounge, Sexy Socialist, Caturist Maoist, Richard Scott Wigton, Connor L, and Jason Pierce. Gurv Mila Mahagwiv, agus Slán go fóill.